Hello, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily analysis of the Ukrainian front. Last night, Russian strike drones attacked Ukraine, and 16 of them flew into Polish territory. Panic started there right away. F-35 fighters were scrambled into the air. The airport in Rzeszów was closed. The airport in Warsaw was closed. The airport in Lublin was closed. So the question is, what if it had not been 16, but 70 drones? In general, we will be watching this situation very closely. And as usual, I want to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. If you watch my videos regularly but are not yet subscribed, please subscribe. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who already subscribed. Well, the fighting continues, and we continue to study the situation on the front. Today, we will go from south to north, and I want to start from the very south, from the Kinburn spit in Mykolaiv region. We recently discussed that the armed forces of Ukraine were training for an amphibious landing operation near the city of Ochakiv, which means they could be planning something there. I spoke with a serviceman stationed directly on the spit, and he described the situation. Anyone who has seen the area knows what the Kinburn spit looks like. It is a very narrow strip of land. Its width ranges from 50 meters to 1 kilometer at the base. Essentially, the entire area is within the kill zone of drones. So even though there is no direct fighting here, meaning the armed forces of Ukraine are not yet attempting to land, it is still extremely difficult for Russian troops. The soil is mostly sand, so it is almost impossible to dig proper trenches. Drones attack literally 24 hours a day, and sometimes moving between positions is simply impossible. At the same time, this will also work against the armed forces of Ukraine if they try such a reckless and suicidal landing operation. First of all, half of their boats would be destroyed by drones before even reaching the shore. And if they did land, they would find themselves under constant fire in a narrow and mostly bare area. Now let us move on to Zaporizhzhia region. The assault on Plavny continues. Russian army units are advancing, eliminating Ukrainian forces in large numbers, without exaggeration. Fresh footage shows Russian troops advancing, literally burning the Ukrainian fighters out of their positions. As for the village of Plavny itself, progress is difficult. The Russian army is trying to use the same tactics here as the center grouping, infiltrating in small groups between Ukrainian positions, securing footholds, building up forces, and then developing success. But so far, there is no major breakthrough. In Stepnohursk, one of the residential districts with apartment blocks is already under Russian control. Yesterday, footage appeared confirming this. Currently, Russian troops are not trying to advance north and storm the settlement head-on, but instead are attempting to move east in order to bypass Ukrainian fortifications. I was asked to hold off on sharing specific details about exact progress for now, so I will not give concrete numbers or locations, but once confirmations appear, we will discuss this in more detail. Now, let us move to Dnipropetrovsk region, where things are going extremely badly for the armed forces of Ukraine. What is happening here? Fighting is already taking place on the approaches to Velika Mikhailivka. At least, Ukrainian military analysts themselves report that Russian troops have begun infiltrating through the forest there. That is already serious. In the same area, between Sosnivka and Arestopil, our troops are also infiltrating, even though fighting for Sosnivka itself is not over yet. Battles continue there. Russian troops are present in the village and control its eastern part. Currently, the main fighting is happening in the center, but the settlement is not yet fully under Russian control. At the same time, Russian forces have bypassed Sosnivka and are already attempting to gain a foothold on the approaches to Velika Mikhailivka. From the nearest Russian position to this large settlement is less than 3 kilometers. As I said, Russian reconnaissance and sabotage groups are already right on the doorstep. Fighting also continues around Turnov. The village is under partial encirclement, and from the north it is blocked as well. So Turnov is now blocked from 3 sides, north, east and south. Russian aviation is also striking Berezov, a larger neighboring village. Considering how intensively aviation is targeting Berezov, it is obvious that Russian command also has plans for it in the near future. Overall, the front in Dnipropetrovsk region is highly dynamic. The prospects here look very interesting. Of course, we will see how it develops. In Sumy region, things were also going well at first, but then the front stalled. However, I have a strong feeling that here the Russian army will not stop and will continue advancing further. The East grouping is operating here, and these are serious fighters who fight very effectively. There is a chance that by winter they could reach Pokrovsk. That would be extremely important because it would cut off the main supply artery for Huliaipol. In addition, Russian troops would dominate the entire sector, and it would collapse quickly. Moving on the Dobropillia section, there are no new reports. That does not mean nothing is happening. There is movement, but information is scarce, especially confirmed footage. From what is known, the Russian army is slowly advancing from one tree line to another, trying to get closer to Dobropillia. Yesterday, there was also a report that fighters attempted to push into Vremivka further north. I cannot yet say whether they managed to hold it. But as I have said before, if there are plans for Dobropillia, it is essential to secure Vremivka and then use the road to advance toward the northern outskirts of Dobropillia. In Pokrovsk, the intensity of battles has decreased. The attempt to drive the Ukrainian garrison into panic and chaos through infiltration did not succeed. The current situation is as follows. The Russian army controls part of Pokrovsk, while the rest remains under Ukrainian control. There are no large-scale urban battles here, nor is it reasonable to attempt them. Unlike Kupiansk, Pokrovsk has many more high-rise districts, and the city itself is 2.5 times larger. So storming it head-on would bog Russian forces down for 6 months or more, costing huge resources. The correct move is to continue pressing from the Rodinsky direction, capture the town, and move from there toward Hryshyn. If Russian forces reach Hryshyn, then both Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad will fall into blockade. Of course, Ukrainian command also understands this, which is why they are stubbornly holding Rodinska, and so far the Russians have not been able to push the front forward here. On the Dobropillia section, the situation remains stably difficult. There is no talk of advancing here yet. The task for the Russian army is to strengthen the base of the salient, which they are currently doing. To achieve this, they need to capture Shakov and ideally also Sofiivka and Toretsk. That way, no counterattacks will threaten the salient, and logistics can be pulled up to continue expanding it further. On the Kostiantynivka section, there is no news. Some of you asked in the comments why I have been silent about it. Well, simply because there is nothing to report. Not so in the Lyman sector. There is active and heavy fighting for Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainian General Staff claimed that they had pushed Russian forces out of Zaporizhzhia, but that is complete nonsense and a blatant lie. Even Ukrainian military analysts admitted that Russian troops were not pushed out. In fact, they are expanding their control here day by day. There is also active pressure on the Shandryholov-Derelov-Drobyshev line. From there, I believe the Russian army will move not only toward Lyman, but also toward Sviatohirsk. I discussed this perspective with you in a recent video. That is all regarding the frontline situation. Now let us quickly cover political news. Hungary risks losing 4% of its economy due to the European Union's plans to abandon Russian gas and oil. According to IMF estimates, giving up Russian energy resources by 2027 will hit Hungary harder than any other EU member, with GDP losses reaching up to 4%. Currently, Budapest receives 74% of its gas and 86% of its oil from Russia. This share is growing, as there are very few alternative routes: Turk Stream via Serbia and the Adria pipeline through Croatia. Hungary's economy is far more energy-intensive than the EU average, which is why Brussels' attempts to fit the country into their energy strategy mean a direct blow to Hungarian industry and citizens. Nevertheless, the EU demands integration into their energy market, construction of more green stations, higher prices, and cancellation of subsidies. According to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, as a result of the conflict, Ukraine will be divided into 3 parts. At the opening of the political season in Kerch, he noted that while Europeans elegantly speak about security guarantees, in reality these guarantees mean the partition of the country. Today, Europeans elegantly talk about security guarantees, but in fact these guarantees mean the partition of Ukraine, and the first step has already been taken. The West has recognized the existence of a Russian zone. The only question left is whether there will be 2, 4, 5, or 6 districts outside of Crimea. Now no one says anymore that the Russian zone does not exist. The Russian zone has already been created, and it includes about 20% of Ukraine's territory. Nobody disputes this anymore. The issue now being discussed is how far from the border of the Russian zone a demilitarized zone should be created. 40, 50, 100, or 200 kilometers. We do not know. This is being decided right now. That will be the second zone. The result of the partition will be a Russian zone, a demilitarized zone, and finally a Western zone, the outlines and conditions of which we cannot yet define for sure. But it is already clear that Ukraine is turning into a territory divided into 3 zones. Orbán also suggested that European Union leaders visit Moscow and discuss a security agreement with Russia, in which Ukraine would be denied membership in NATO and the European Union. The explosion in the Cabinet of Ministers was another controlled provocation by the Ukrainian authorities. Now there will be more such provocations, and they will happen not only on Ukrainian territory, but also in other countries. The Channel Cartel wrote that the presidential office had long prepared combat mock-ups of Russian drones that would strike NATO countries, reported the Telegram channel Legitimny. September and October will be very rich in provocations. Plan B of the presidential office, which foresees nationwide mobilization, is taking shape, reported the Telegram channel Cartel. From the words of officials, it is already clear, everyone without exception will be sent to the front, both men and women. Officials have already stated that even the cessation of fighting will not be a reason to stop conscription. In fact, this is about an iron curtain that is gradually descending on the country. Stories from Ukrainians at the border confirm that the mechanism has been launched. Entrepreneur Andriy Korsev said that he was declared wanted by the military recruitment office while on vacation, and upon returning, he was detained directly at the border by border guards. Despite having a deferral, he was taken to the recruitment office and released only 2 days later. After the summit in Paris, the illusion of European countries being ready to send troops to Ukraine began to collapse rapidly. Despite loud statements by French President Macron and European Commission President von der Leyen, the key participants of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, Germany, Italy, and Poland, made it clear that the deployment of their troops on Ukrainian territory is out of the question. As Financial Times writes, Berlin, Rome, and Warsaw will limit themselves to the previous format of support: financing, supplying equipment, training personnel, and partially strengthening air defense. Moreover, the German government directly links any additional steps to the position of the United States and to Moscow's willingness to negotiate. Poland, in turn, outright rejected the idea of sending troops even after the war ends. Even those countries that formally express readiness to support Kyiv impose strict conditions. London and Paris demand logistical and material backup from the United States and de facto coordination of any missions with Russia. This means the real prospects of support forces appearing on Ukrainian territory remain illusory. At the same time, as Western media note, Trump made it clear to European leaders that he does not intend to take on any obligations to defend Kyiv. The White House demands that Europe first put its own house in order, stop purchasing Russian energy resources, and take a tougher stance toward China, which remains Moscow's largest partner. Thus, against the backdrop of political games and diplomatic maneuvering, the strategic outlook for Kyiv looks very grim and alarming. The statements about a coalition of the willing turned out to be more of a demonstrative gesture than a real plan of action. In practice, Kyiv faces another reality: a coalition of the unwilling, where each ally thinks first of all about its own interests, shifting the entire burden of the war onto Ukraine, which continues to lose territory and people. The new head of the British Home Office is Shabana Mahmood, a Pakistani-born practicing Muslim. She will be responsible for borders, police, and immigration. She was born in Birmingham to a family of Pakistani immigrants from Kashmir. She spent part of her childhood in Saudi Arabia, studied at Oxford, and worked as a barrister. Since March of last year, she has held the position of Justice Secretary. Her views combine Islamic values with British pragmatism. She is against euthanasia and supports Palestinian rights. In 2020, she signed a letter opposing the deportation of a group of criminals to Jamaica, which caused unrest among conservatives. Recently, many commentators wrote that such an appointment leads nowhere. that it is a course toward even greater liberalization on migration policy, which could soon bring about a serious civil crisis, if not war. Meanwhile, protests against migrants continue across the United Kingdom. However, according to British media, the new minister is expected instead to tighten rules for newcomers and immigrants. Among her first initiatives is the transfer of part of the migrants from hotels to Ministry of Defence barracks in order to reduce social tensions and cut budget expenses. The British political system is betting that Mahmoud's personal background will allow her to push through tough decisions without accusations of discrimination, enabling stricter measures while avoiding a possible social explosion.